Hey guys, and welcome to episode 8. This is Trevor, just here to tell you that we talked for very long on this episode, so we have decided to split the episode into two parts. This is part 1, what you're watching now, and part 2 will come out later this week on Friday morning. Episode 9 will still be coming out regular time next week. On Tuesday, our normal release, so don't worry about that. It's just this episode needed to be split into two parts because it was so long. I'm not sure if this will become a pattern in the future as we get to talking about more and more aspects of the book. It's just Paul and Eliot had a lot of questions and a lot of theories about these chapters specifically as we were finishing up part 2 of The Way of Kings. Be sure to check out part 2 on Friday when it releases. We've got some fan art that I got permission from the artist to show, and Paul and Eliot had some cool reactions to it, so be sure to check out part 2 when it comes out on Friday. Thanks, guys.
Hey, and welcome back to episode 8 of Following Noadon. Today we're going to be covering chapters 26 through 28, finishing up the second part of the book. Trevor, what are your 2 words this week?
So my 2 words for these chapters, let me find them, are resolve and progress.
Resolve and progress. Okay. What about you, Eliot?
Mine were a little more simple. I had singing and toil.
Toil, like T-O-I-L?
Toil.
Like
Toil.
foil, but with a T.
Yes. Toil and singing. Okay. Interesting. So we had resolve and progress. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then singing and toil. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. So, Trevor, do you want to go ahead and explain your 2 words for us?
Sure. So, resolve is for Dalinar. He has been deciding and debating in his mind for quite literally for the entirety of chapter 28. But this has kind of been weighing on his mind for multiple chapters leading up to this, of what he needs to do about these visions. Is he actually going mad? Is this from the Almighty? Does he need to stay in as High Prince to lead his house? He doesn't know what he's doing. And at the very end of chapter 28, he has resolved his decision and he finally comes to a decision. And progress is for Kaladin. He is, at the end of chapter 27, he is finally getting through to the Bridgemen. The entirety of chapter 27, it's very, very about comradeship and fellowship, and he's finally breaking through and reminding these Bridgemen what it is to be human, and that's progress.
Truly, yeah. I'm impressed that you came up with such deep words right off the bat. That was impressive. just popped right into your mind, I imagine.
Got him.
What about your 2 words, Eliot?
So I had singing and toil. I'll talk about toil first. I actually I'm stealing yours a little bit from last episode. I think you had hardworking as one word. I also originally wrote hardworking for my word for this episode, but then I had to pull up a thesaurus to find a 1-word version of that. So I came up with toil as my 1 word for hardworking. But I put that in there just because I think Dalinar has kind of an epiphany moment. Well, kind of, where he uses his shard plate to work instead of fight, and he realizes in that moment that there's value in hard work, and hard work can teach us a lesson. And I think that's part of what he's been learning from Way of Kings all this time, is that you have to get down and dirty sometimes and put your put your back into it to understand what the people you're leading are experiencing or going through. And so that's why I did toil. Also because the bridgemen have a pretty nasty, hardworking job in front of them as well in the chasms, which we'll talk about. So that was toil. And then singing, because I noticed a couple examples of singing in these chapters. The first one was we learned that the Parshendi sing as they fight. I have questions on that, which we'll get to. But then also part of the progress that you just talked about, Trevor, that Kaladin makes, he makes a lot of that through the use of singing and bringing the group together. There's a couple different examples where they sing together, and that brings them together with this sort of brotherhood bond. And I thought that was really, really cool. So singing.
That is, yeah. I'm very proud of your words this week. Well done.
Thank you. It's my first time, so I didn't want to.
Yeah.
I didn't want to fall flat. I really thought about it.
Good intro into it.
All right. Before we get too far, though, we should back up a little bit and do a spell check. So the spell check for this week it's pretty simple. It's nothing too crazy like we had a couple weeks ago, but this one is, we're just getting to know some of the new bridgemen. So the first spell check, Eliot, is the bridgeman who Rock prompts to start singing, and he's a little nervous at first, but he does actually end up singing. And how would you like to say this name?
This is one of the ones that makes me nervous that you're picking this, because I can't think of any other way to pronounce this name. So I'm going to go with Dunny.
Yep.
Perfect.
It's Dunny. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. You had me worried.
Paul, what do you got?
I spelled this the only way I could think that made practical sense in my mind, and I have a feeling it's going to be incorrect because it's always not what I think. But I just did a simple Dunny.
Correct.
Boom.
Good job, gentlemen. It's a nice
Nice.
softball to start it off.
Yeah.
All right. Our second one is another bridgeman. All three of them are bridgemen, actually. And the second one is a bridgeman who challenges Kaladin and is not very. He's been mentioned a couple times coming into this chapter, but he's particularly grumpy at Kaladin as we've seen him. Eliot, how would you like to say this name?
So I think the bridgeman you're referring to is Sigzil?
Yes.
Is it just Sigzil?
Sigzil, yes.
Aha.
Zigzil.
2 for 2.
Sigzil with a S.
Sigzil.
There you
Okay,
go.
that's what I thought. Okay, I'm gonna go kind of abnormal here. I'm gonna say Sygzil. Sigzil. Wait, is that Sygz? Yeah, I'm sticking with that.
All right. Eliot, you wanna correct him? You're not very close.
Pretty on.
Just swap your vowels. You should have gone for simpler. Just put some I's in there and you would have had it.
Okay, I went for the adventurous assumption.
Yeah, the exotic.
I respect that.
Yeah.
And
That's
our last one is a bridgeman who defends Kaladin when Sigzil kind of gets on his back for trying to be chipper in these dark, depressing chasms. Eliot, do you know who I'm referring to there?
I think so. So pressure's on now. I feel like I've got to get this one right so I can get the perfect score. I don't think I've gotten close to that one yet. And this one has me a little worried too. But for this guy, I'm gonna go with Dre. I'm gonna ignore some things and I'm gonna go with Dre.
Okay. So in the audiobook, he's known as Drehe. There's another vowel in there. And Paul, how would you like to spell this?
Drehe.
Dre. They kind of smash it together. It's kind of like Dre.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna go with Drahe. Totally off, but that's my.
You're not super far off. It's just Drehhy.
Interesting. I definitely would not have gotten.
I went for completely ignoring the H and just smashing the E and Y together, but I was wrong.
Basically.
All right. I think last week was better, but it's not not terrible. So good job, gentlemen.
I think we overthought these ones
a little bit.
Yeah.
Almost too kind of easier. So we're like, oh no, it's not that easy, right?
Maybe I should have led with this, but these names are relatively simple because Brandon Sanderson put his friends in Bridge 4. So these are nicknames and shortened names of Brandon Sanderson's real life friends who he put in Bridge 4.
Interesting. It's kind of a lame place to be put.
It's
rather I wouldn't want to be
rather unfortunate. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's a cool Easter egg.
Yep. Okay. So chapter 26. I would like to actually lead this one. And I'm going to highlight that in this chapter, we get a couple different scenes, actually. This chapter's relatively long in that it has multiple scenes in it, but it's not the longest as far as word count goes. The other two are longer than that, but multiple things happen in this chapter. So Dalinar is debating with Renarin. He's listening to the Way of Kings, and it's not comforting him. He's listening to this passage about Noadon is sitting in a chair, and he's looking at candles on a shelf, and he's musing about, I could snuff these candles out with one breath, but they could also, kill me if I get too close, because I could catch on fire, and if I don't keep these candles in something contained, then they're going to burn down what they were meant to illuminate. And he's kind of just musing and rambling, and you don't really know what's happening. And Dalinar, he usually asks for a reading of the Way of Kings when he's upset or wants to sit and think for a bit. And today it's not working for him. He's deliberating about these visions that he's having and what he needs to do with the kingdom, and his mind is not settling. And kind of halfway through this, there's a bridge run that starts, and he does end up going on it. But before we get there, I just wanted to highlight that there's a lot going on in Dalinar's mind, and if he were to reveal everything that's happening in his mind, he would look more mad or crazy, whatever word you want to look there, or whatever word you want to put in there. He would look more mad than everyone is already perceiving him to be. If he were to fully disclose what's happening, people would trust him less, not more.
The more bits and pieces of the Way of Kings, the in book Way of Kings, the one Dalinar's listening to, the more we get of that, the more I'm getting the impression that it is so at odds with the current Alethi culture, and Dalinar's aspiring to these values that Noadon is writing about in his book, and in at least my perspective, this seems an honorable thing to do. These are worthy pursuits of understanding the responsibility of leadership and understanding what the burden of leadership is, and all this stuff. But Dalinar knows this is so not what the Alethi are about. It's not at all in line with the values of Alethi culture, which is creating the conundrum that he finds himself in.
And something to remember, which we found out last episode, is Nohadon himself was a king of Alethkar a long time ago. So juxtaposing the Way of Kings with current Alethi culture, you've seen how far the Alethi culture has fallen from what they originally aspired to and what Dalinar is trying to live up to. Sadeas even laughs in his face about nobody lived like that. It never was that good. You're trying to force onto your men and onto yourself things that nobody actually cares about. That this is not a worthy pursuit. But yeah, just another thing real quick before we move on. The mental image in my head when he was walking around his quarters and he's stepping on this rug that he stops and thinks about. This rug is too fine. I'm at war. I should be in a war camp, not a palace. And the mental image of him just losing his mind and picking up all of this art and rugs and stuff and just throwing it out the door, and then what everyone would think of him if he actually did that. And then he also thinks about the Way of Kings as words emanating from the book, like Stormlight from a sphere. If he were to describe that to another man as words trying to speak to him, they would think he would be crazy. They would say, you're actually losing your mind. You need to stop.
Yeah, it's interesting how there's the whole roles and things that men and women can and can't do in this universe is kind of fascinating because it's just so extreme, right? Like people are under the impression that Gavilar knew how to read, which was like crazy. Or was it? No, it was knew how to write.
Correct.
Also.
Knew how to write.
Yes, and that was just no way. Like no way that's a man knew how to write and such. And so yeah, I just think of, I guess, the status quo that's upheld there, and how Dalinar can't talk to anyone about his his new book club. So
it reminds me, it takes me back to the conversation that Kaladin had with Syl one of the times when he was carrying the plank back and forth in the Bridgeman camp, and they're talking about, what is madness, and Syl's asking him about that to try and figure it out, and she basically comes to the conclusion like, oh, so it's just whoever the majority votes as, he's not like us, so he's therefore mad. I think that's exactly what's happening to Dalinar. He's the one that has the truth, if you will, but because no one else sees it and he's the only one, he's seen as mad, and so he gets this label of madness put on him, even when he's the one who's actually aspiring to a higher calling than the rest of them.
True. I really like that, and I thought that was such an interesting moment to kind of look at madness in that sort of way as simply an outlier from a group, and it's very accurate to how Dalinar is here. Even further on, we'll touch on it later, but Dalinar doing things so out of the norm as to like help these workers, like do their work for them and things like that. He's just like viewed as a crazy person just because he's different, even though we the reader know what he's doing seems good, and it seems like a great way to lead, or at least a great way of, especially from his perspective, on how to help the situations around him. But he's labeled as crazy because what he's doing is simply different or abnormal to them.
Yep, exactly.
There's a quote that I want to read that's in chapter 26, and it's between Sadeas and Dalinar. They're on their way out to this bridge run that Dalinar has finally decided he wants to go on, and we'll talk about that in a second. But Sadeas rides up beside him, and they're talking about the Radiance and the Way of Kings, and if it's really worth living up to those types of things because the Radiants, after all, betrayed them, or at least that's what they think. That's what they've been taught, is that the Radiants eventually betrayed them. And this is Sadia speaking. They used elaborate tricks to imitate great powers and pretend a holy calling. When their deceptions were discovered, they fled. Their powers were not lies, they were real, Dalinar replied. Oh, Sadia said, amused. You know this? Didn't you just say that the events were so old it might as well been in the Shadow Days? If the Radiants had so much marvelous power, why can nobody reproduce them? Where did those incredible skills go? I don't know, Dalinar said softly. Perhaps we're just not worthy of them any longer. Sadia sniffed. That book ruined Gavilar. Now it's doing the same to you. You've listened to those stories so much, they've got your head full of false ideals. Nobody ever really lived the way the codes claim. The quote that really sticks out to me in there is Dalinar says, maybe we're not worthy of them anymore. Sadeas is convinced that the Radiants were liars at best and treasonous at the worst, where they pretended to have all these special powers and pretended to live up to these codes, but nobody ever really did that. They lied about that, and maybe they even went further than that and betrayed us to whoever, the Voidbringers, somebody. He doesn't know. But I just really like that quote, that Dalinar fully believes that the Radiants had these powers and we're no longer worthy of them.
I do think Dalinar has a little more insight than Sadeas does, or at least we think he does, because of the combination of his study of the Way of Kings and also the visions that he's got. And we don't know if he can trust what he's seen in the visions or not yet. Dalinar doesn't know if he can trust them quite yet, but I think that Dalinar is hitting on the truth that Sadeas just can't even understand. Sadeas that's all he's ever been trained to know. That's all he's ever seen is the way Alethi culture is now, whereas Dalinar is kind of the one who's seeing back to the truth. But I do think in this scene particularly, I think Sadeas is really just pushing Dalinar's buttons. I think he's coming up and he knows how to get Dalinar riled up, and that's exactly what he's doing here. He's mocking him, he's goading him, he's trying to get a reaction out of him. It almost makes me think that Sadeas almost seems like he's trying to push Dalinar over the edge on purpose. Not literally because they're walking along chasms, like not over that edge, but
right.
over the mental edge. He's trying, he's seeing, Dalinar, you're on the edge of going crazy. What if I push you a little bit? Can I get you to snap and really become crazy? That almost seems like what he's after here, which kind of makes me just ask, like, what are you trying to do here, Sadeas? Why what is your motive? What are you doing this for?
And kind of in response to that, we see some interesting switches with Dalinar in that we have labeled as the Blackthorn is back. He kind of works to reinvigor this this heroic figure that he's known to be in battle, and goes on a
Plateau run.
Yes, I was gonna say bridge run, but he's not running the bridge. So run out, and you kind of see this like life reinstilled, and kind of the thrill and the rush of battle again. And I think that was an interesting thing, even though it doesn't go super well for him. He kind of has a midlife crisis almost in the middle of it. But kind of on the edge of trying to push Dalinar off this mental edge. I feel like he kind of bounced back almost with that. It wasn't in direct response, but almost his indirect response to that.
So, something I want to highlight here, and Elliot, I'll ask you to answer this question for Paul, but I'm going to need a theory from each of you about this. Elliot, how is the thrill annotated in the book?
Are you referring to the fact that thrill is capitalized in the book?
Yes. The thrill is capitalized, and it's been referenced multiple times. Sadius has asked Dalinar if he still feels the thrill, and Dalinar has asked Adolin if he feels the thrill. And both of them have been uncomfortable when questioned about this, and the thrill is capitalized each time. Let's start with Paul. Do you have any opening thoughts about this?
Any guesses on why thrill is capitalized?
What is the thrill? Why do they keep saying this?
The thrill, my guess is that it might be tied to the old Dalinar and that kind of like the Blackthorn, right? This character who's ferocious in battle and just heroic and honorable, and so maybe thrill is Dalinar is kind of in that state, in this like heroic fighting Blackthorn state, as opposed to his more, I guess you could call it his new self, where he's seems a little more old and a lot more of a thinker, right? Less of a vigilant fighting hero and more of a thinker. So I guess that'd be my guess, is thrill referring to the fighting, the warrior Dalinar.
Okay. Elliot?
So I think the bit in the chapter that talks about this refers to it as the lust for battle. And I think so far the examples we've seen of thrill seem fairly similar in my mind to like adrenaline, but it seems to be a little more tied to battle than just the generic adrenaline, that boost of that energy or excitement. It seems to be maybe kind of a cross between adrenaline and bloodlust, or that kind of mist of battle that's sometimes described as coming over a warrior when they enter battle, just this mist before their eyes, and they go crazy and go all berserker or whatever. So I think I'm gonna kind of guess that it's kind of the mixture of the chemical boost of adrenaline with the battle lust, bloodlust side of the sort of berserker warrior.
Okay. Something that's great. And something I want to highlight here is it's not 100% adrenaline, because none of the bridgemen have mentioned it. It deliberately has something to do with fighting,
Oh yeah.
because the bridgemen certainly have adrenaline and are scared for their lives, and they are running into battle, but they are not fighting, and they have never mentioned the thrill. So the thrill has something to do with fighting.
Yep, that makes sense.
That's really curious to me, since yeah, I never would have known thrill was capitalized from the audiobook.
I
And that's an interesting word to capitalize. So
I didn't know it was capitalized until I read the book, which was my third read through, and I was like, "Oh, interesting."
There's a few other words too that are randomly capitalized that are not proper nouns, and I'm currently working on a theory for why these other words are capitalized, but I feel like I don't have enough evidence yet to pull it together. So I've kind of just started a list of capitalized words. Thrill is on that list. Calling is another one that's on that list, but I need some more examples before I can make a guess as to why.
Okay. Let's discuss the battle itself, because we do get a the battle isn't fully annotated. They talk about the beginning of the battle and how they set up for the battle, and a little bit about the Parshendi, but then it cuts to they won the battle. So they start by setting this huge siege bridge, which is led by Chulz, and as it's being pushed across, Dalinar and Adolin themselves run across this bridge and jump over the bridge first. They are the first ones across, and they're clearing this landing for the bridge, and so everyone else can come across. And there's some cool descriptions of how two shard blades fight next to each other. They're like within arc reach of each other, but not too close that they hurt each other. So like they can keep the blade moving, and they both like kind of spin in circles next to each other. It's kind of an interesting dynamic. But just keep in mind that this is absolutely not how Sadeas does his bridges.
Yeah, complete opposite really of how Sadeas does his bridges. And I loved this section. It was so awesome to just I can picture this in my mind. You know, the movie scene for this is crystal clear of Dalinar and Adolin just charging this chasm and leaping across and just landing and clearing out all these Parshendi while their men coming behind them. And ironically, even Sadeas is sitting behind them watching them do this lead from the front, whereas his method of battle is not only lead from behind, but let's send in the unarmed slaves first to take all the arrows and death, and then we'll send in the soldiers because I don't even want to risk my soldiers, much less myself as the charge. But no, Dalinar and Adolin, they are the ones to lead the charge, and it's so cool.
I also love this section.
I also loved this section. I really did like. It's very vivid imagery, and you can picture it very easily with them like leaping in and starting this fight. So this is also the fight that Dalinar in the middle kind of has a mental breakdown, doesn't he?
Yes.
Is this where that happens? Yeah,
He hesitates. Yeah, definitely.
So at first he is so thrilled with the battle and how I don't know, maybe he feels young again or something, and then he kind of gets really worried, and one starts thinking about how much death and destruction is going on around, and mentally trying to cope with that in the middle. And it was an interesting like back and forth internally there.
Yeah, this seems to be the moment for me that he really doubts himself for maybe the first time. Like I think he's had some creeping doubts maybe leading up to this, but this is the big moment that then leads into the the discussion he has with himself all throughout chapter 28 where he's wrestling with the decision he has to make. But this is the moment of he hesitates in battle, he falters, and that's never happened to him before. It definitely felt like a big moment.
What I read it as, and what I read it as the first time I listened to this book, was suddenly he doesn't know why he's fighting. He needs to.
Yeah.
He's always known why he's fighting. He's fighting for Gavilar. He's fighting for the vengeance of Gavilar, and he's in the middle of fighting, and he feels sick. He doesn't know why he's fighting. He doesn't know why he's killing. He needs to find something, and he does. Shortly after he fights for his men, he looks around, he sees the lives of his men who are there for him, and decides to continue fighting because his men are there and they need him. But that I read it my first time as he doesn't know why he's fighting anymore, so he needs to figure that out before he goes back out there.
Yep. Now, this was also the battle that we learned quite a bit, or at least some, about the Parshendi, which I was fascinated by. We get a handful of different details about how they fight. We learn that they fight in pairs. We learn that they're strong, they're heavily armored, but at the same time they're fast and they're agile and they can jump around and they're hard to deal with. There's also a comment in there about how well coordinated they move on the battle and how they almost I don't know that they seem to know what each other are thinking or almost I don't think it said that, but that was kind of where my head was going with it. And then the most interesting fact to me tied into my word for this one, or one of my words, was they sing as they fight. And it even talks about their song changes as like their tactics change in the battle. That was I have no idea what to think of that, but it definitely stood out to me as that's really interesting.
Yeah, since you pointed that out, I've thought about it more, and talking about how coordinated their attacks are, it would make sense kind of with the singing and that they're kind of in rhythm with each other. There's kind of that like
Yeah.
rhythmic like flow, and they all have some way to kind of be in sync in a way, which I think is really interesting and honestly kind of a cool tactic. That'd
Yeah.
be my guess for the purpose is to put everyone in a similar rhythm. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they just like singing, but that'd be my guess as to what the purpose is for the singing. But that's very interesting. I've never heard of anything like
Yeah.
that. It's kind of
So,
Same.
if you remember back to the prologue where Zeth kills Gavilar, the Parshendi are there at the feast. Gavilar is signing a treaty with the Parshendi, and there is a big feast. And the one thing that's, well, one of the things that's mentioned about the Parshendi is they have celebratory drums. And they are there celebrating with their music. The Alethi don't really like their music, but by the end of it, their Alethi are all drunk enough to dance to the drums of the Parshendi, and they don't care. Now, if you tie this singing to like medieval time battle tactics, sometimes they would have sometimes armies would have drum like drums in the back to signal to the troops to keep them coordinated of are we pushing, are we retreating, that type of thing. So that's where my mind went when you hear the singing, and it changes as they change tactics. They're communicating. They're talking about are we pushing, are we backing, are we trapping, what are we doing? There it's a rhythm of coordination.
yeah.
But it's
That's super
yeah,
cool.
it's interesting.
Like that, I always I have this image in my mind now that there's someone at the very back. I guess the war chieftain who's the one who just sings, and then it's kind of like a chain maybe, and then he changes the song, and then it kind of chains up to the front again.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that's just a random image that I thought of, but which would be funny. They just have the head choir master
Yeah.
at the top. You know, whoever sings the best and the loudest is the in charge of the army.
Kind of coordinated with that is at the very end of chapter 26, Dalinar sees a Parshendi shard bearer on the other plateau. The shard bearer was not in the battle, but as he's kind of looking off to the west or east, with one of them, and musing
East.
Yeah, he's looking east, and he's musing about, oh, what am I going to do now? Kind of how he does that. He sees this Parshendi shard bearer, and they kind of stare at each other for a second, and then he runs away. So maybe that's the lead singer.
Could be.
I found the moment though where Dalinar's looking up at that shard bearer as odd, because we learned before that the Parshendi have shard bearers. We already knew that, but why wasn't the shard bearer in the battle? Why was he hanging back and not fighting? That seems really odd to me. The Parshendi seem to have this very coordinated battle tactic, but you'd think that you definitely want your shard bearer at least somewhere involved, and he wasn't. So odd.
Yep. Before we
So now's probably
go ahead.
a good time to actually jump ahead just a smidgen while we're talking about Parshendi. It's in the Kaladin chapters, but we or chapter 27, but we learn a little bit more even in those chapters about Parshendi. We learn there that the Parshendi grow their armor out of their skin.
Yep.
which
Mhm.
that's crazy. I was not expecting that when we had that moment.
Yeah.
And then there's a little bits where the bridgemen are kind of going through their belongings and their pieces. And I think my takeaway from some of that was they're realizing that the Parshendi are more culturally developed than they thought. They originally thought that they were just pure barbarians, and they're realizing that no, actually he's got this sword with these very ornate inscriptions or engravings on it, and they kind of have this thought of, wow, these guys are a little more developed than we thought they were.
So something that we could harken back to is Roshar is Earth but crustacean, and
Yeah,
everybody or everything that grows here, it's grass, but it's underwater grass, and it's a dog, but it's an underwater dog with antenna and 6 legs, and
Yeah.
this is a chol. It's basically a cow, but it's got a shell, and it's a crab.
Yeah.
Yep. So perhaps Barshendi are crab people. They grow their own carapace armor and shells and stuff like that.
apparently.
I don't like that imagery, but you could be that could be accurate. Yeah, maybe so. So this is, I guess, a brief rewind with the Parshendi. I know we've learned about them a little bit, but are they from? Do they live like near the Shattered Plains? I don't remember the map. Like, I don't know. We've been in the Shattered Plains. We've been a little around there, but we have not seen the whole world yet. And I don't remember fully where they're from. Are they from like a weird place?
So here's what you know so far. The Parshmen are all over Roshar. They are docile. They're human in form, but they have dark skin. They've got patterns on their skin, and nobody treats them as human. And randomly, Dalinar and Gavilar were hunting a chasm fiend on the south side of the Shattered Plains, and they run across Parshendi. And this is explained to you in chapter 28, as Dalinar recounts this to Yasna over Spanreed, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But they found Parshendi at the very first Alethi sighting of Parshendi was the south side of these Shattered Plains, and they originally couldn't communicate with them. The Parshendi did not speak Alethi, but the Parshendi very quickly learned Alethi. That's all you know.
Interesting. I think it's crazy that they very quickly learned Alethi, considering how, as far as we know, they're not very intelligent, or at least that's what the people in this story think. But it's starting to seem as if they might be very intelligent. They're just very different.
I think we had some hints in previous chapters as well, where Dalinar's thinking about the Parshendi, and I want to say there's a section where he notes that the Parshendi seemed strangely prepared to be sieged in the Shattered Plains. They were ready for it. They had planned this out to have the Alethi chase them to the Shattered Plains, and then they're prepared to hole up for a long time here. And that again just doesn't seem to quite make any sense. The Parshendi seem to be smart. They seem to be very capable, very dangerous warriors, and yet their general tactics and strategy don't seem to make a lot of sense. There's got to be something else at play here that we haven't seen yet.
Yep. So yeah, you guys can start theorizing, but also the Alethi don't know why they killed Gavilar. They still don't know. The Parshendi took credit for it, for the assassin in white, who we know as Zeth, but the Alethi still don't know why there was an assassination. So maybe there was some Cultural misunderstanding. Who knows? Maybe you're just
Maybe in their culture that was a sign of respect.
right. Maybe you're just supposed to send when you make an alliance. Maybe you're just supposed to send their leader to the Tranquiline Halls. Maybe that's just a common courtesy.
Yeah, exactly. It's the hi, how are you? Nice to meet you. I'm Zeth.
Yeah.
You know?
Here's my shard blade. Goodbye.
Yep.
Exactly.